Today, I'm going to be doing some special things. I was kind of trying to think about this weekend and Walter's birthday and doing something special to kind of give for re-giving. So I wanted to talk today about some experiments that I did in the past that have actually proven Russell science, because just like any other science endeavor, we want to have experimental proof to support the concepts that we're putting forth, instead of just taking people's words for it. So I'll just leave this up for a real quick second. This is almost always how I'd start my slides, is just giving you the plan and the purpose of the University of Science and Philosophy as it was written by the founders, Walter and Lao. And I won't read it, but you can just see that it's all about kindling the spiritual nature of man, explaining the science of man, which is the least understood of all sciences. And that's really what this university is about. And so I just wanted to kind of start with that. So, like Margaret and Scott, I'm going to be answering the question, what's the most significant part of all of this science that Walter and Lao put forward to us? And when I thought about this long and hard, I realized the most significant thing is we can actually begin unifying. We have a unification in Russell's science of specifically electromagnetism, which Scott was mentioning, and optics, which is the study of light and how light interacts. So over here I have a diagram of electromagnetism, and when you Wikipedia that word, you get a whole bunch of stuff about charged particles and electromagnetic fields. But forget all that stuff for the minute. The biggest thing about electromagnetism is if I take a piece of iron and I wrap a copper or conductive coil around it, and I plug that coil onto a battery, I create a magnet out of the electricity. So really just boiling it down to exactly what it is, it's electro, which is electricity, and magnetism, which is a magnet. So with electricity, we can create a magnet. And when you turn the battery on or off, you can switch on or off the magnetic poles. So it's like a magnet, but rather than a permanent magnet that is always on and you just stick it to your fridge and it's always going to stick there, an electromagnet, you can actually shut the magnet on or off at will by connecting or disconnecting it to an electrical source. And by the end of this talk and by the end of the experiment, you're going to understand how this phenomenon of electromagnetism, I lost my pointer, is the same as optics, which is the principle of the interaction of light with lenses, or just how light interacts with physical objects. So I have here a positive converging lens or a convex lens, and you can see how the light's coming in and hitting, and it's coming to a focal point, right? So that's the basic idea. And then the other lens we have is concave, and that magnifies things. It brings things to a larger point for us to see. So just a little bit of sort of a beginning for me. How did I get into all of this stuff, right? It's a kind of something I haven't talked a whole lot about, but I went through school. I went through all the way through college and all that stuff, and very traditionally trained in the world of science. I've loved science since I was a child. My mother will tell you I played with all kinds of experiments and different things. I'd take vacuum cleaners apart, all kinds of stuff, just to see what was inside and try to understand it. So by the time I graduated college, I had spent a semester in a class called analytical chemistry. And my professor actually allowed us in this class to take the whole semester and study whatever we wanted. using scientific method. And I decided to study a device called a Hoffman apparatus, which is basically, it's a piece of glass in the shape of the letter H. And you fill it with water and acid, and you connect the two lower parts of the H to positive and negative electricity. And what happens is you get off one, you get hydrogen gas, and off the other, you get oxygen gas. And the apparatus allows you to actually grab the gas and measure it, because what chemistry says is that you should get twice the amount of hydrogen that you get to oxygen, because the chemical formula is H2O. So you get twice the volume of hydrogen. Now, when I actually did this experiment, and I ran it multiple times, I found that the volumes were not coming out exactly 2 to 1. So I wasn't getting exactly 2 parts hydrogen to 1 part oxygen. And I went to my professor and I said, why is the experimental result not matching the theoretical? And my professor said something to the effect of, well, they put fudge factors in there to make it come out right. A fudge factor. Never heard that word before in science up to that point. So I didn't think much of it at the time, but later on, right, I graduate. I'm kind of looking for a way to use all this knowledge in my head, but, do something with it. And I came across Walter Russell and all these things, and I was opening my mind to new possibilities. And at that time, I came across a guy who some of you might know, Stanley Meyer. Stanley Meyer was famous for creating a water-powered car, okay? It was a dune buggy. Ran completely 100% on water. There was no gasoline, there was none of that. He had found a way to separate hydrogen and oxygen, not with electrolysis, but with a very highly efficient process that he called hydrogen fracturing. So he could actually use resonance and high voltage potential energy, not amps, which is consumption of energy, to actually pump the water resonantly to make the water literally fall apart into its components. And one of the most famous things that Stan said, or that I learned from him, because in a lot of ways he was my first teacher as I was beginning this journey of alternative energy, we'll call it, right? And he said, you always got to learn to ask the right question. And you can see this is kind of a perspective thing. If you're in the wrong perspective, you're going to ask wrong questions. If you're in the right perspective, you can ask the right kind of question to get the right kind of answer. And Stan was also a very spiritual man. He believed that angels were walking around protecting him and things. And you can even see Bible quotes in a lot of his publications, because he felt this higher calling that to save America. He started his hydrogen fracturing research in the 70s when there was an Arab embargo and they were restricting oil to the United States. And he worked out that it would take about 27 days for everybody to run out of fuel in the US and for the whole economy to collapse if we can't get oil. So he said, Lord, show me a better way. The Lord showed him basically how to split water for almost no energy whatsoever, and he developed this into a water-powered car. So he also mysteriously died later on and said that he was poisoned, but I'm not going to focus on that a whole lot. Simple questions, that's what Stan was really getting at. Ask the right kind of simple questions. So the question I ask when you're new to Russell's science is there a simple experiment that we can do to prove these, I'll just call them theories. They're not really theories to me at this point, but if you're new to the work or you're just coming in cold for the first time, we can just say Russell has an alternative theory of science, and can we experimentally prove it? And subsequently, a sub-question, what can we actually learn from this simple experiment? Excuse me. So it turns out there is a simple experiment, and it was published in 1957 in Walter and Lao's book, Atomic Suicide, which is what radioactive is, why and how it kills, and what we can do about it. And this was the Russell's attempt at kind of warning mankind as to the dangers of radioactivity, and also trying to educate people as to what some of the alternatives could be for using radioactive power. So I'm directly quoting from page 133. If you have the book, you can go straight to that. And there's actually quite a number of experiments in there that you can do that are very simple and cheap. You really can go to Home Depot or any hardware store and get the required materials and do them yourself, and you can prove it to yourself, because you don't just have to take his word for it, right, as you're reading the whole book. So let's see what he says. He tells us on 133, make 2 conical coils and put the apices together. And don't worry about visualizing this, because I got a drawing here in a minute. He said if they could meet at a sharp point, you would need just a single needle, like a compass needle or a sewing needle, to find a common center of gravity. If you could spread the cones apart and put iron filings there, you will find that they will gather together in a ball. So he's telling you what the experimental result ought to be. It should result in this if he is correct. It should get a ball. And he said the needle, if you were to use the needle, would point toward the increasing density, or like Scott was saying, it would be the center of gravity, or the center of the earth, or the center of that ball. So you only need 1 needle, because if you use 2, it'll do the same thing. Now he says pull the cones apart to elongate the sphere into a spheroid. And now you can use 2 needles because you've actually divided gravity into 2 instead of 1. So this is a drawing. Now, let's see here. Go forward. Okay. So this is the original drawing. I just wanted to show you the original. It's a little bit low quality. What we actually have now is an HD upscale. So does everybody see that one a little clearer? So this is upscaled, but this is still Walter's original. And take note that this was in 1954 that he made this drawing. So he made this drawing, and then he wrote in the book 57 the actual written out how to do the experiment. So what we see here is, you see this is man's bar magnet at the top, and then we see nature's bar magnet. He's telling us nature's bar magnets are conical. They're not a straight bar where the north and the south pole on each end are the same volume and the same size. So he's telling us 2 conical coils and point them apex to apex, and you'll get a ball in the center, which is the highest density there. It's a gravitative center, he calls it. And what I want you to take special note of at first is this drawing. Do you see how he's showing you the iron filing pattern? And it will be a ring on the outside at the cone base, and it will be a ball or a mass on the apex end or the contracted end. So this is the drawing, and he made this in 1954. You see this throughout Walter's artwork of his scientific diagrams, is this concept of male and female both being positive charge. And he's telling you this is how matter is born. Matter is born with male and female, just like humans are born with male and female coming together. So it's literally the electrical combination of male and female which creates the color spectrum, and it creates gravitational centers. It basically creates all created things in this mechanism. So you can really see that he's using the same principle again and again and again and again. It's a sort of a hallmark of a divine architect. So what did I actually do? So I read this atomic suicide thing, and I said, well, I'm a scientist, and I have a little bit of money, so I can build this and I can test this for myself. So I fabricated, or I paid to have fabricated steel bicones. So this is stainless steel cut into cones, And the cones have, if you see here, threaded screw. So I can actually screw them together, or I can unscrew them and I can have separated cones like that right there. And I put the cone in the center of a Lazy Susan so I could turn it. And I taped it down with duct tape, and here I am in my apartment and I'm winding conical coils. And this is how I did it. It's so simple, it made me laugh. Because I had called Toby Groats years ago. He and Dr. Tim Binder had tried to build conical coils in the 90s, and he told me on the phone, he goes, it's too difficult, can't be done. And then here I am in 2015, I just did it with duct tape and a Lazy Susan. So there's always a way to do it. Always. Don't ever let anybody tell you you can't do something. There's a way to do it. The way to make the copper coil, the copper wire stick to the steel, double-sided tape. Quite that simple. So this was the final experimental apparatus. It's the same one I have here. It hasn't changed in all these years. I never took it apart. Once I built it and it worked, I said I should probably keep this. So this was the original experiment. You see, I did it exactly like Walter told me to. I just put two conical electromagnets pointing apex to apex. But you can also do other experiments where you put them back to back and so forth and play with different field interactions. The copper wires connected to just simple positive and negative, red and black. And the only thing I'm doing different to Walter is I added a Tesla flare to the coil and I made it a bifilar. Which just means that I have twice the number of turns as normal. And I did that simply because there's only one layer of turns on this coil, so it's a relatively weak electromagnet. But I didn't care so much about optimizing it. I really just was concerned with the experimental result and does it do what he said it would do. So I took a single cone, I hooked it to power, and I turned it on and stuck the apex end into a pile of iron filings. And do you see what happens on this end? Does it look exactly like his drawing? Yeah. It makes a mass of iron filings on that end. And if we look at the opposite end, the iron filings are all around the outer edge. Matches perfectly with the 1954 drawing. And this end is the expanded end of the magnet, and I couldn't make anything stick here in the middle. Do you see? None of the filings would stick here, and then of course there's a hole where the threaded nut goes there, so nothing would stick there at all because it's just an empty hole. So far we're proving what he says is that the apex end of the cone is actually going to pick up a relatively huge amount of mass. You see this conglomeration here. And the south pole end now, or the expanded end, that will pick up the same mass, but you have to actually reduce it to a powder, and it will only stick to the periphery of that outer edge. You see? And this is, again, he says all of nature's magnets are cones. So it's only mankind that build straight, equal magnets. Every magnet that occurs naturally is actually conical because of the vortex of creation. Now, so this was in 2015. This is the original photo that I took. This is the experimental result that Walter Russell predicted in his book, that you should get a ball of iron filings between the apices of the coils when the coils are energized with current. And indeed, and I'll do it in front of you, you do get a mass of iron filings there. So it actually does work exactly like Walter Russell said it should, which is experimental proof. Now, 2016, a year later, I kind of started thinking more about this, and I started playing with different field interactions because Walter always showed these eclipses or these equators that are expanding from the center outward. And I'm actually able to see, you see here, I'm able to suspend steel washers way out into space. They stack and they all become magnetic, and they stack in different directions all the way out. And this isn't actually even putting any coil power into the coils. I actually just have ferrite ring magnets that I snapped onto the base. And so this draws no energy at all to do this. This is just from permanent magnets. Here's another shot. Another shot. So why was I playing with the conical coils? Well, Walter tells you about them, but he also published this diagram here in the home study course in 1962. And what this is a schematic for an over-unity generator that he named the optical dynamo. And it took me a long time to understand this diagram because it's deceptively simple. This double coil drawing here in the middle, it took me a while to figure out what that is, but that's actually an electrical load or a resistance. Could also be an inductive load or a coil or a motor. But what he's basically telling you is put the power in here. It's going to wind through the conical coil and actually power the load, and then that's the neutral side because that's the other side of the AC circuit. And what actually happens is because the core is conical, it's going to multiply in this direction, and it's going to create that collision that I showed you where the washers are going to stack out into space. And so I thought, well, does this actually work? Can you actually get this to happen? So I rewound the other pair of cones I had with thick wire, and I put alternating current in, and instead of this bit here, which Walter suggests you put a heater here to get heat, I actually just put a light bulb or an electrical resistance. And when I turned it on, I get light, but does everybody see this bit here in the middle? So I actually get two outputs for one input. Or in other words, I'm using electrical current to power that light bulb, but I'm getting a residual multiplication in the core. And this is exactly what Walter was telling us in this diagram. He actually tells you in written words in the home study course that you can take more energy and heat out of this system than the electrical company sends you in power. So it's a way to get more from the power that you paid for than you put in. Some people call this over unity or 0-point energy, but I don't really like 0-point energy. I think it's a wrong terminology. So I did this in 2017. And this is experimental proof of concept that the dynamo works, just like Walter stated. I later found out in the 60s by reading his notebook that he did have success in the 60s at building this unit. The short story is Lao took him to Florida, and when they came back, the experimental unit was gone, and the notebook with all the data in it was also gone. And I learned that from Mrs. Russell in a tape. She's talking to some students, and they asked her what happened to all this research she did in the 60s, and she said, well, basically guys walked off with it. And they couldn't finish it because Walter died in 63. And so a couple years later, he had died, and it never went anywhere. He did give copies of schematics to Raytheon, and they were trying to replicate it. But as far as I know, publicly, they never did. So the experiment works, and we can now start to say, well, if it works, why does it work? Well, it works because we live in an optical universe. So we're actually going to start stepping into unifying forces now, because the cone multiplies the apex exactly in the same way that you can take a lens and focus it, which is a cone. If you could see the light, it multiplies to a point. So we don't have electromagnetic fields as such. What we really have are fields of light that are in either compressing or expanding, just like Scott was explaining. It's either compression or expansion of light. It doesn't have anything really to do with electromagnetic fields or anything like that. So Walter drew this in the archives here as a way to explain the multiplication of light through lenses. But I've shown you that the multiplication, so here's, everybody knows you can take a magnifying glass, right? And you can focus it and you can burn a hole in a piece of paper. Kids use it to fry ants, but I think that's pretty barbaric. It's much better to just burn a hole through a piece of wood or paper or something. Now here's a video of a guy doing it, and he's burning a hole in a piece of wood. Now, did he put any energy in to do this? He's burning a hole in the wood with the power of the sun, but the power of the sun can't burn a hole in that wood on its own. But if you focus it, if you compress the light, it starts to perform work, but you didn't put anything in to do that. It's the multiplication of the vortex compressing the light that makes it higher potential, and now it'll do work on the way back downhill as you radiate the energy. So, big takeaway, the electromagnetic force, which Scott mentioned, and I appreciate it, that there are in physics 4 fundamental forces. They consider the electromagnetic one force. Gravitation is a separate force. Electroweak and strong forces, which are nuclear forces that hold the atom together. Basically, what I can tell you is those last 2 don't exist. They were manufactured by physicists to account for why the proton of positive charges was actually slammed together in the nucleus, when the Colomb law says that those particles ought to fly apart from repulsion. So they had to create this strong force that's somehow pulling the nucleus together. And Walter always kind of laughed and made fun of this because he's like, there is no cosmic glue that's holding matter together. Matter is actually compressed from the outside in, just like you pump air into your tire. So there is no there is no strong and weak nuclear forces in the atom. You can basically get rid of those, and that leaves you electromagnetism and gravitation. And Walter Russell also unified these forces. So actually there's really only one force in the universe, but it's perceived as a duality, simply because we have 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 of everything. So we see where there is a continuous direction of motion, we actually can interpret it in 2 different ways just by how we look at it. So there's an awful lot of unification in Russell's science that is not present in modern day physics. So the electromagnetic and now optics, which they also consider a separate branch of physics, they are actually one and the same. They're not different. It's all the same. And we can prove this simply by the fact that the conical electromagnet solenoid, another name for an electromagnet is a solenoid, by the way. You have them on your car, you have them everywhere, actually. They're almost used everywhere, just about. And it behaves identical to focusing light through a lens. So if I can pick up more with the north end of that magnet, that's because I've contracted it to a point. Just like I can burn a hole through a piece of wood or paper by contracting and compressing the light to a point. So if the electromagnet is behaving exactly like an optical lens, why are these considered 2 different branches of physics? Because it's working exactly the same way. It's just nobody's noticed, other than Walter Russell, that when we divide light, right, we actually have electromagnetic radiation. To him, there was no electro or magnetic fields, it was just light. And the more we understand light and its behavior, we can actually kind of throw out a lot of this physics that we've been building upon since the time of Plato. So I won't talk a whole lot about unification of gravity and electromagnetism, but you can read an entire chapter on this, chapter 8 in Atomic Suicide, and the entire chapter is literally called The Oneness of Gravity and Magnetism. And I highly recommend that because it basically will teach you that, just like I was saying, that these forces are not separate. They're actually one as a duality, and they work together to create the effect we call gravity. So you can read this Atomic Suicide book and have more knowledge than the physicists actually have presently, such as Neil deGrasse Tyson, because you'll know the why. Why do these things work? You'll have an answer. And if we actually look around, right, there's an awful lot of proof that we live in an optical universe, just about everywhere. Anybody ever seen double rainbow? Yeah. So double rainbows, if you look, next time you see one, right, look at the colors, because the colors will actually flip in the second one. And I'm not going to explain that to you right now. I just want you to see it, observe it, and think about it next time you see one. Why are the colors flipping, right? It's just something to key into that it's an optical universe. And then, of course, there's sundogs, right, which are sort of flares, but you can see the curvature, of course, which is optical curvature. And so that's pretty much all the slides. How are we doing on time?
Of course, we're not going to say no to an experiment, Darren.
Well, I just want to make sure I have enough time because they're going to have to zoom in quite a bit on the equipment here. So we can go ahead and zoom in now. So I showed you the pictures, but I'm actually going to do it now in front of you, so you don't just have to take my word for it.
Now, for those of you that are here in the room, you're welcome to gather a little closer. You'll just be mindful of the video that's here.
Yeah, as long as we don't block the video, if you want to come closer, because these are a little bit small. Okay. All right. I might have to move the wires around a little bit. I used to run this vertically, but for demo purposes, it's a little bit better to do it horizontal. Okay. Yeah. I can also move the table if that's convenient. Is that good? Here, let me just do that a little bit. Is that better? Yeah, here we go. Yep, beautiful.
You guys move back just a little. Sorry, we can't see.
Pan just a smidge to the, yeah, perfect, right there. Okay, so now you're all in for a treat because I did this experiment in 2015. I've never actually just turned it on and shown anybody except Scott Vanderpool, who's seen it a number of times. And we've tried to film this before, but to get close-ups and everything, and if the camera's blurry in any way, and then we tried to upload it to YouTube, people were going to say, you're full of it, So we wanted to make sure we could get it, really nice before we just went ahead and put it on YouTube or something. So now this is the same equipment I've used. I haven't changed anything. This is the originals as I constructed them. What I have here is iron filings. See that? Iron filings. You can get this from any scientific supplier, Edmund Scientific or anything else. A lot of this stuff I got from educator websites for doing science demos for kids. And this by the way might have an application for that in teaching kids Russell science rather than electromagnetic science. So let's hope, right? We can teach our kids this knowledge. So I'm going to pour some out into this weigh boat here. Okay. And so what I have is these coils are hooked up to the red wire and the black wire, which is positive is the red, negative is the black. Okay. And now, so basically what's going to happen here, I'm going to scoop some of that up. I'm going to turn the current on. Now you can see when the current's on, the voltage dropped from 16 volts, right? When I turn it on, it drops to 0.4 volt. And that actually means when the voltage is dropped, that means the current's actually running through the coil. And I actually have it now, it's a magnet. Do you see the ball? Is it clear to everybody? So this is what Walter Russell said would happen in 1957. That the conical compression of the coils, when the current's running through it, creates a vortex, and it creates a gravitative center in the middle there, which can suspend the iron filings relative to the Earth's gravitational field. So I still think it's cool every time I see it, but I've made a little Earth gravity center here. And it's teeny, 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 tiny compared to the Earth's gravitational field, but it's the exact same construction. So a little mini planet or a mini sun right there, as far as the forces are concerned. Now, when I turn the current off, the Earth takes over again, and it drops the iron filings. And you can see there's a little bit of residual magnetism, and it still wants to join that pathway. So I kind of have to knock them off. But now you can see the gap is returned. And that's with everything off. So that is the experiment as Walter described it. And it does work exactly like he said it would. And it still blows me away. Because this was in 1957. Why was I the first person to check this result in like 30 years?
How about when you pull it apart, did you get to?
Yeah, so I'll pull them apart now, and I'll just elongate the gap between the coils a little bit. Okay.
Do you have a little needle or compass or anything like that?
I use the filings instead of the needles because it's just a little bit easier to see the effect. The needles are almost more of a tactile.
Yeah.
It's a feeling. You feel it pull toward the magnet. But same as if you had just a piece of steel with a permanent magnet, it pulls it in. So now I have an exaggerated gap here that you see. And I'll just repeat the same thing. Okay. So I'll turn the current on, and the voltage dropped, so do you see that? It's bridging the gap,
So it's elongated.
but it's not a perfect sphere anymore. It's a spheroid. Or Walter describes prolation and oblation. So technically what we have here is a prolate spheroid. And if you were to push the cones through each other, you would have an oblate spheroid, but it would be suspended within the overlap of the coil. Because I also experimented with attempting to wind interpenetrating coils as well. But I won't talk about that much now, because what I actually found is you get cancellation. And that's probably because just like in a planet, when the planet starts to oblate, you actually push, the poles are contracting inward toward the center, and so the planet's dying. And so a coil wound that way is also radiating more than it's generating, and thus I wasn't getting amplification of energy.
Can you put a piece of white paper to the back?
Yeah.
Because the iron filings are sort of matched the same as the black cloth.
You bet. Okay, that better?
Yeah.
You see that? So you see how it's bridging the gap? And by the way, I can touch this. I can touch this because the magnetic field, the electrical current won't kick me once it's a magnetic field. Just like a magnet doesn't give you a shock, even if you wave it, which is supposed to generate electricity, by the way. So there's, this is actually pretty safe just because of the fact that I'm using direct current, and I can actually, I can touch the coil, I can touch the steel, right, and I don't get shocked. But it is creating a gravitative center here in the middle. Oh, sorry. That bridges the gap. And now, once again, I will just, here, I'll put the, can I get that underneath? No. So I'll just put the paper underneath, because this makes a mess once I turn this off. Did someone have another? Yeah, perfect. Okay. Everybody see that? All right. Now, 3, 2, 1. So you see, as soon as the current's off, the magnetic field is gone. And the gravitational effect is also gone. So it's really the spinning, right? It's the spinning of the current that creates the electrical vortex. And this is very different than modern physics explains electricity, because what they'll tell you all about is electrons, and how electrons actually are flowing from the negative through the coil to the positive. But I can just tell you right now that electrons don't really exist the way that they're explained. And I also looked up a book one time that said there was approximately 10 to the 18th electrons in 1 ampere of current. And I have 2 questions. How the hell they know that, and who the hell counted them all? Because they said approximately, so that just means they don't really know. So they still don't really know what electricity is. And even Nikola Tesla, 80-something years old, said, I've harnessed electricity, I still really don't know what it is, though. I put forth to you, you can read A New Concept of the Universe, and Walter actually defines, can I borrow that real quick? Walter actually defines what electricity is in this book right here. And this was the very first book by Walter Russell I ever read. So this will always hold a special place in my heart, because this was a sort of an awakening and an opening of my mind at a very special point in my life. So I will always be grateful for Walter and Lao for writing this book.
Darren, did you do it with standard bar magnets? Ever?
I did, and basically you get the filings stick to the magnet, and then you got to pull them all off because you can't shut the magnet off.
Oh, yeah.
So
What if you do it as an electromagnet with 2 nails, perhaps?
yeah, as an electromagnet's the way you want to do it, because you want to be able to shut the fields on and off. And you can also rewire this to put different effects together. Like you can put the 2 norths together, you can put the 2 souths together, but that's a little bit beyond the scope of what I wanted to cover today. This is just the original experiment as I did it and as Walter wrote it in Atomic Suicide. So that's pretty much the conclusion, unless you want to see just the individual magnet on its own, the cone. If anybody wants to see that, I can do that too.
Do you want to do that now?
I can do it now.
Okay.
Would you all like to see that? Okay.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Did Walter Russell ever do this experiment, or was this sort of a thought experiment?
Well, see, that's the fascinating thing. He made the drawing in 54, right? And then he wrote about it in 57. I couldn't find evidence that he did that experiment other than I actually found conical coils that he had manufactured for him by a company called Alco Valve Company in the 50s. So I do think he actually, well, he definitely experimented with conical coils because that was the genesis of his optical dynamo generator. So I do believe he did this experiment. I just don't have the physical apparatus that he must have used. It was either lost or stolen. I hate to say that, but a lot of people stole Walter's work because they saw the potential in it, right? And they wanted the credit instead of giving it to Walter. So I'm trying to bring validation to what Walter was trying to tell us, and to make scientists seriously look at it and consider it as a possibility, because most physicists regard a lot of this as pseudoscience, and I'm trying to bring it back to this is real science, or let's call it natural science. This is how nature operates, and we want to be in tune with nature's working so we can be in harmony with it. So I'm going to turn the power supply off.
We'll zoom in again in just a moment so you can see
Yep.
it on the screen.
And I'm going to just take a single cone. We still good on time, Kim?
You're at your 30 minutes, Darren.
Okay, great.
We've given you leeway. This is
All right, so now I'm just going to put the wayboat there. Okay. Hook it up before you turn the power on. And by the way, if you feel like you can't do this or something, or oh geez, I'm not technical, I was not technical when I did this, believe me. But I knew I could do it. And that's maybe the key, is just when you work with God, God works with you, right? So when you want to do something and no one can stop you, you're going to do it, and God will help you. So I'll try to bring this back into the camera view. Okay, so now I just have a single coil. You see that? Single cone. I'm going to unscrew the bolt so you can see the butt end is, right is left, left is right. Okay. So that's the base. You see, it's just solid steel. Nothing fancy. That's the contracted end, and that's the side view. All right. So now I'm going to turn that on, and it's on. You see that? Would somebody hold the paper behind it so you can get the contrast? There you go. You see that? So that's the contracted end. Now watch what happens when I turn the power off. Boop. And now I'll flip it around. Okay, and I'll turn it on. Again, I'm not getting shocked by this. And there you go. You see it, it's on the edge, on the periphery here. We got to get a better one. There you go. See that? So it's on the outer edge. There's nothing in the middle. I can't make it stick there. It's very unusual because a magnet pulls equally, a bar magnet pulls equally on either end. This magnet, it's differential. One pole is stronger than the other, or one is weaker than the other, right? Depending on how you look at it. So, and this is what Walter said, is all of nature's magnets are cones. And we can build our magnets like cones and emulate nature. How cool is that? It's like a vortex coil, almost. Well, it is. So now you all know something real special, which is Russell's not just moving air. He's not just pie in the sky. He was talking about very real, practical spirituality, but practical natural science. Something that you can actually build and work with your hands and do something with it and produce effects that will kind of mystify physicists at present. So I hope you're excited by it, because it still makes me excited, and I'm really, really happy to share it with everybody. just open and freely, because as far as I'm concerned, it's been published since 1957. I mean, that's really how far back this information really goes. So philosophy.org is the website for all things Russell. You can find a number of free scientific diagrams. You can even find the optical dynamo schematics that Walter drew out himself. Feel free to build them. Feel free to ask if you want help with the technical end of it. You know, I'll try to answer your questions as best I can. But build it and test it for yourself, because then you'll have personal truth. And if people think you're crazy or whatever, you can just say, well, I tested it and it worked for me, so I'm going to believe it, you know. And don't let anyone tell you you can't do something, because you can do it, let me tell you. So thank you very much.
Relax. Ask for more.